Welcome back to the final video of part 2. We ended the last one on the theory of taxing externalities. Now let's see how carbon taxes actually work in the real world. And the picture is a mix of failure and quiet success. Start with the failure. Most countries still have no effective carbon taxes at all, and it's worse than merely doing nothing. Globally, fossil fuels are subsidized to the tune of some $330 billion. Governments actively paying to make the polluting option cheaper. Those subsidies are also, on their own terms, a very inefficient way to support incomes in low-income countries because most of the benefit flows to those who consume the most energy, who tend not to be the poor. Now, the success story. The Scandinavian countries started taxing carbon back in the 1990s, and they now price it at somewhere between $50 and $130 per ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. And here's the striking result. Those taxes produced real reductions in emissions without a loss of economic growth. That's the crucial empirical rebuttal to the fear that carbon pricing must wreck the economy. The key, as the slide notes, is redirecting the tax burden, taxing carbon instead of labor. You don't raise the total tax take. You shift what you tax away from a thing you want more of, work, and toward a thing you want less of, emissions. Tax the bad, relieve the good. If you find these lectures worthwhile, subscribing is a nice way to keep them coming to your feed. Now let's turn from environmental to social externalities and to the instruments that address them. The centerpiece is the living wage, SDG 8. A living wage is instrumental for a whole cluster of other goals, for reducing poverty, for ending hunger, for healthcare, for education. Why? Because when a wage is genuinely enough to live on, families can afford to feed enough to live on, families can afford to feed themselves, stay healthy, and keep their children in school rather than at work. So one well-designed social instrument radiates outward across many SDGs at once. The second instrument mirrors the carbon tax logic exactly, but applied to behavior. Taxes designed to change behavior on alcohol, on tobacco, on sugar-rich beverages, and the like. These are sometimes called sin taxes, and they work on the very same principle we just met. Put a price on the harmful thing so that people do less of it, and use the revenue for the public good. Whether the externality is carbon or ill health, the tool is the same. Price the harm. Here, we reach the intellectual core of this final video. Measuring and pricing externalities. A first step for any business toward addressing its remaining externalities is to measure and, where possible, price them. Why bother putting a monetary figure on something like pollution or underpayment? Because attaching a financial value to social and environmental externalities is what lets you optimize across all three dimensions at once. Financial, social, and environmental are familiar F, S, and E. Without a common unit, you can't trade them off. With one, you can. And what makes this newly possible is a wave of innovation. On the technology side, better measurement, information technology, and data management. On the science side, life cycle analyses, social life cycle analyses, environmentally extended input-output analysis, and environmental economics. Together, these make it genuinely feasible to monetize social and environmental externalities. And once you can express F, S, and E in the same currency, you can sum them. And that sum is the integrated value, I. You'll sometimes see this called, in the earlier literature, the total value or true value methodology. That word true is doing real work. The claim is that conventional prices are, in a sense, false because they leave S and E out. This slide pictures the whole journey of this part in a single move, from financial value to integrated value. On the left, you have the traditional measure, financial value alone, our factor F. On the right, you have integrated value, F plus S plus E, the financial, social, and environmental values combined into one figure. Look at what this does. A company that looks highly profitable on a purely financial basis might look far less impressive once you subtract the environmental damage and the social costs it imposes. Its integrated value could be much lower than its financial value. Conversely, a firm generating large positive externalities, training workers, cleaning the air, might have an integrated value well above its financial one. This is well above its financial one. This is precisely the shift we drew back with the SF stages, from a one-dimensional world of shareholder value to a three-dimensional world of common good value. Integrated value is simply the number that makes that shift operational. Let's pause on a genuine dilemma this slide raises. Who should act first to internalize externalities? On one side of the debate, the government should go first through taxes and regulation. That's the theoretically cleanest answer, because government can set a level playing field so that no single firm is punished for being responsible while its rivals free ride. On the other side, all parties should act. Businesses, investors, and consumers shouldn't wait for a government that may never move. My own reading is that these aren't really in opposition. Government action is first best, but in its frequent absence, waiting is itself a choice with consequences. The externality doesn't pause while we argue about whose job it is. So the honest answer is probably government should lead, but nobody gets to use government inaction as an excuse for their own. This slide asks, broadly, how to deal with externalities. And it's worth stepping back to collect the full toolkit we've assembled across these two videos. There's government taxation, setting a price on the harm. There's government regulation, setting a hard limit. There's emissions trading, capping the quantity and letting the market find the price. There's reputation and market pressure, which price externalities through public opinion. And there's voluntary business internalization, firms measuring and pricing their own impacts through integrated value. No single instrument does the whole job. In practice, dealing with externalities means layering these tools. A tax here, a regulation there, market pressure and voluntary action filling the gaps. Which brings us to the example that ties every strand together. Here is my favorite example in this entire part. The true price of roses from Kenya. Picture a rose grown in Kenya and sold in Europe. Its conventional price, the sticker price, pure financial value F, is 70 cents. But that price is, in our sense, false. It ignores the social and environmental costs baked into that rose. When you actually measure them and add them in, the true price, F plus S plus E, comes to 92 cents. That gap, from 70 cents to 92 cents, is the externality, made visible and given a number. Now here's the beautiful part, and the hopeful part. That true price isn't destiny. You can lower it by fixing the underlying problems. Optimize the production process to reduce the social and environmental costs. Ship the roses by boat instead of flying them. To cut carbon emissions. Power the greenhouse with solar. Use closed-loop hydroponics to slash water and fertilizer use. Train workers in health and safety to build their skills. Set up gender committees to reduce harassment and discrimination. And pay a basic living wage to improve workers' well-being. Do all of that, and the optimized true price falls to just 74 cents. Close to the original sticker price, but now genuinely reflecting a rose that's far less harmful to grow. That's the entire philosophy of internalization in a single flower. Measure the hidden costs, make them visible, and then engineer them down. Now, I've sold you enthusiastically on monetization, so let me be honest about its pitfalls, because a good scholar holds both. First pitfall, this whole calculation is done on efficiency grounds, but efficiency isn't everything. You also need to invest in adaptive capacity, the ability to absorb shocks. Sometimes you should deliberately overinvest in safety, beyond what a narrow cost-benefit sum recommends, precisely to protect people and the environment and to reduce catastrophic production losses. Second pitfall, the ethical aspects. Some externalities are genuinely difficult to monetize. How do you put a price on a human right? Any number you assign risks trivializing it. Third and deepest, the three capitals, financial, social, and environmental, are not perfectly substitutable. This is the fundamental critique of just adding F, S, and E into one figure. You cannot simply buy back a destroyed ecosystem or a lost life with financial gains elsewhere. Which leads to the fourth pitfall, perverse outcomes. If you naively add everything up, The huge economic gains from, say, deforestation can appear to offset its environmental destruction, and the spreadsheet blesses the clear cutting. That's obviously wrong. So integrated value is a genuinely powerful tool, but it must be used with judgment, not as a license to trade away things that should never be traded. Second to last, let's confront the uncertainties, because the future here is genuinely unknowable in important ways. There are two great uncertainties in this field. Policy uncertainty. We don't know when or how hard governments will finally act, whether a serious carbon tax arrives next year or in 20 years. And technology uncertainty. We don't know how fast clean technologies will improve and fall in cost. The T term in our IPAT equation. These two uncertainties interact and compound, and they make any single point forecast almost meaningless. So how do we cope? With the tool we flagged earlier, scenario analysis. Rather than betting on one future, you construct several plausible ones. A world with aggressive climate policy, a world with weak policy, a world of rapid technological breakthrough, a world of slow progress. Then you ask how your company or portfolio fares in each. Scenario analysis doesn't remove the uncertainty. Nothing can, but it lets you make robust decisions in spite of it. Let me draw this part to a close with the key takeaways. First, social and environmental externalities are real and consequential, yet they're absent from the traditional production function and from neoclassical finance. That absence is the root problem this entire part has circled. Second, we have instruments to internalize them. Government comes first. Taxes and regulation are the first best solution. But as we've seen, that's not always done. So business must step in too, incorporating social and environmental costs into its decisions through the integrated value approach, F plus S plus E. And third, scenario analysis is our tool for coping with the deep policy and technology uncertainties, calculating a company's value under different scenarios and prompting firms to reconsider their strategy and actually take action before the future forces their hand. Measure the hidden costs, internalize them, and plan for a range of futures. That's the discipline of sustainable finance in a nutshell. Let's recap this final video, and then this whole part. We saw carbon taxes in practice, most countries still failing, fossil fuels subsidized by hundreds of billions, yet the Scandinavian countries cutting emissions without sacrificing growth by taxing carbon instead of labor. We saw social instruments, above all the living wage, and we built the central method of measuring and pricing externalities, arriving at integrated value, F plus S plus E, brought vividly to life by the true price of roses from Kenya and tempered by honest pitfalls and by scenario analysis for an uncertain future. Step back, and here's the arc of all of part 2. We began with the sustainability challenge, mapped it through planetary boundaries and the SDGs, brought in finance and the 3 stages from refined shareholder value to common good value, and finally learned how to internalize and price the externalities that markets miss. In the next part, we build directly on this foundation, turning to corporate social responsibility, its forms, its practical examples, and how firms actually put these ideas into practice. Thank you for staying with me through part 2, and I'll see you in the next one. That's where we'll stop. Thank you for your time today, and if you enjoyed it, subscribing is the best way to keep the series going for you. Finally, if this lecture has sparked your interest, have a look at our bachelor's and master's programs in Leipzig. It's a lively, welcoming place, and studying here in person might be well worth considering.